Wildlife Commission meeting to order. It's Friday, February 1st, 9:30 in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Yeah.
He had nothing to do.
I'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'm not.
Commissioner Drew, lead us.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're in a different location today, so let us know if you can't hear us or if we need to work on anything and do any housekeeping. So I see some blank stares. I don't know if everybody can hear us good enough. We good? All right. Roll call. Suzanne? Here?
Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Okay, and County Advisory Boards, could you please stand and say who you represent?
Michael Reese, Clark County. Juliana Carson. Billy Williams, Mineral County. Phil Griggs, Virgin. Roy Ladley. Greg Hopkins, Eureka. Tom Barnes, Elko.
Okay, thank you, guys. We'll move on to agenda item number 2, approval of agenda. Anybody have any comments on the agenda? Seeing none, this is an action item. We'll take it out to the general public. Anybody have comments on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Okay, Commissioner Drew.
Could we get a clarification on item 6B, which is the Predator Manager Report? Do we have clarification on if that's something that this commission needs to review and approve, or if it's simply an informational item? The question I had was on item 6B, reports informational, which was the fiscal year 2012 Predator Management Plan. I know I've gotten some correspondence with a question as to whether or not this was an informational item or if this was something that the board per NRS had to review and approve.
Mr. Newton, can you help us out?
The board does not have to review and approve it. There is a question as to whether the board can review and approve it. The approval part seems pretty easy, that yes, you can. The review part and the depth of that review is somewhat murky. So if you'd like, I can do some more research on that question. I've looked at the legislative history of the changes to that section of NRS 502, and I'm not altogether clear what their intent was. At one point, when the bill was originally proposed, it said approval of the commission. It now says under the guidance of the commission. So obviously the legislature backed off full approval. As you read through that legislative history, there's discussion of the two sides, that being the commission and NDOW, needing to work cooperatively on that. But in exactly what level that cooperation is, it's somewhat of an open question at this point.
Is it something that with a little more time we could figure out what role we're supposed to play in terms of approving? Or?
You could, based on your interpretation of it, but I think actually what you may want to do at some point in the future is enact some sort of policy or regulation that more specifically outlines the commission's role or its view of its role in the production of that predator management plan.
Okay, and I guess my question isn't so much in the production of it as it is this something that we should have listed as, and obviously we can't do it today, but as an action item rather than an informational item?
It actually, the way I have read the legislative history and the statute, it could be listed either way. It could be listed as an informational item, it could be listed as an action item. That's within the purview of the commission in conjunction with the department. So the way it's listed now is appropriate. If this was listed as an action item, I would also tell you that's appropriate. That's how, I don't want to say ambiguous because it's not ambiguous, but how much room there is in terms of the language that they used in the statute for interpretation by the two parties to that document.
I guess I'd be curious to know how other commissioners maybe feel on this, but I don't know. It's still unclear to me as to what our role on this is supposed to be. And so I don't know if it makes sense to possibly table the item for this meeting until we can kind of clarify or figure out a direction on that, or that's kind of the confusion I have.
Okay. Commissioner Rain?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that we do have a commission policy that clearly delineates the role in this, and as we all know, it is under NRS, it is the responsibility of the Director of the Department of Wildlife to carry it out, and it appears that, for instance, last year we again we're breaking state law, and by not having the commission vote formally on this, he would likely be breaking state law as well by not following commission policy. And let me delineate that exactly. Are you familiar with commission policy number 25? This has been around for quite some time. It was actually enacted back in 2000. And I know it's been looked at since then and reviewed, and nobody ever came up with any better suggestions for it. And in there, it specifically states, and this would be policy section 4, the second paragraph, Department shall prepare an annual wildlife damage management plan outlining proposed actions needed for the management of wildlife, and upon approval of the commission, recommend that a sufficient amount of funding be forwarded to the, and it goes on about that. So our policy that we've had enacted now for roughly 13 years, well, it'll be 13 years in June, states that upon approval of the commission, the amount of funding will be forwarded to the wildlife account in the State General Fund, to the State Predator, Animal, and Rodent Committee for Wildlife Damage Management work, as provided in Chapter 567 of NRS. And it further delineates a little bit of, that. And it also, in here, recognizes the United States Department of Agriculture, Animal, Plant, and Health Service Inspection Wildlife Services as the authority for predatory and nuisance wildlife damage management under cooperative agreement with the Department of Wildlife. And so it directly directs them, and there's a further paragraph in there that restates that they are the recognized authority in these matters. So everybody should review that. I believe we have commission policy now, nearly 13 years old, that clearly delineates our role. And by not taking a vote on it, as we didn't do last year because it was never brought before the commission, it would be likely a violation of state law by the administration, and it would be so again by not following commission policy once again. Thank you.
Can you help us out with what you heard? Does that change anything that you just said? I'm directing my question at Mr. Newton.
I'm not familiar with that particular policy. I don't have a copy of that, so I have not had a chance to review that. If the commission policy states that it has to be approved, that still leaves room for latitude in terms of, does that mean that the department presents it and you approve it or deny it as it is presented, or how deep into the minutia is the commission allowed to or responsible for becoming involved? And so it helps to answer the question, but it still leaves some question in my mind in terms of what the commission's actual role is in that process. Because to me, if you're just going to approve the policy, that could easily be interpreted as the department presents it and you vote it up or down, not that you change portions of it and so forth. And I don't know what the intent of that policy was in conjunction with the language in 502-253. And the policy, if the policy conflicts with the statute, the policy goes away. And I haven't had a chance to review the policy, so I can't tell you whether or not it conflicts with the statute.
Okay. before we have any further discussion, I'm going to ask Secretary Mayor. We have some ongoing projects that have been multi-year projects that are probably ongoing as we speak, or into like sage grouse. They're, you know, if we don't get something going and make sure that we have those contracts in place for electric protection, I just want to make sure that everybody understands where the department's at with animal damage, and tell us where we're at going forward one way or another on this.
I believe we contacted, I'll have to check with Larry, but either November or December with Wildlife Services, and said that, you know, the projects that were ongoing that they were doing, that they're going to be funded and continue, so there's no break there. We have to start treating in March, you know, the sage grouse stuff. So this is not, it has not changed the work that's being done by Wildlife Services. There's some projects that sunsetted, and we took those dollars and are doing different things with it. The total dollars available for Wildlife Services, I think, is increased by about 40,000 this year. So they haven't seen any decrease. Some of the projects are a little different. We moved money from one project to another project, but it's still a Wildlife Services project, and we wanted to have a little more say in what they do relative to if we have a problem with a lion in a sheep relocation area, we want to be able to direct them to go take action, and we have money in a project. So you know, we've had this thing scheduled for three preliminarily for three commission meetings, and now we have a schedule, because we've had a really heavy schedule, and all of our agendas have been very, very full. But this hasn't affected Wildlife Service and their ability to do their work. And these projects are really, it's not a new plan every year. I mean, we look at Project 18, 8 years. We committed to a 10-year project. They've killed thousands of coyotes on Project 18, so it's the next year rolled up. So.
Commissioner Macbeth?
Dag Newton, can you tell me when that statute was amended? What year? You know, you have that in front of you?
I do. The amendment dealing with this particular part of it, I believe, was in 2009. And the legislative history on it is fairly brief. This was really the only thing that was done with the particular bill in question.
Okay, and so if the amendments occurred in 2009 and policy, the current policy is based on the statute prior to that, then I would say that you know, the policy isn't have as much weight as whatever the statute and the legislative history and the intent of the 2009 amendment is. That would be my position, just as a matter of statutory construction.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. That anything in the policy that conflicts at all with the statute, the policy yields.
If you like, I can give you a historical how this has come about since 2007, if you're interested. We had a complaint in 2007 from Dr. Lent that the Predator Committee was out of control. They had no authority to approve or the Predator plan. At that time they were. I asked the DAG at the time knew to look at it. She said, yes, that's correct. There's no statutory authority for the commission to approve that report. I talked to Clint Bentley at the time. Clint agreed, and I said, look, the bottom line is that we're not going to do projects that you hate anyway. It's going to be a collegial thing, and I would hope that if we say a project that you're interested in is not supported biologically, that you'd back off that as well, because we don't want to get sued over something like that. And that's how we operated for a year. Then when Dr. Lent became chairman of the commission, that whole thing, that changed. The commission then did approve it, whether or not the NRS was there. Then in 2009, Mr. Claiborne introduced legislation to clarify that, to give the commission the authority to approve. If those of you that remember sitting through those hearings, the sportsmen were against that, and so was the committee. And the bill was basically dead until the last day of the hearing that. And Randy Stevenson, the DAG, for that committee was requested to go back and find some language that indicated there's going to be a collegial relationship between the department and the commission. And that's where the word guidance came about in this legislation. I mean, I sat through all those and I thought myself, that's why you see what you see. And I agree with David Newton that what the commission needs to do is take a look at the policy you currently have. And, you know, if you want to approve it, I don't think the department, I'm not going to be around for the future, but I don't think the department cares whether you approve it or not. I think that we need to do the best job we can. And we have $400,000 a year. Some of these are multiple year projects. And quite frankly, we need to be reflective from a professional perspective of whether we're doing the right thing. And if we're not showing the results that we should be showing and spending the money appropriately, we need to find the right prescription. And we've been searching to do that. And Project 18 was a good example. That is not a prescription that works. That doesn't mean predator control doesn't work. It doesn't work in that context. We need to find the right prescription. So that's kind of the cliff notes of how we got to where we're at.
Any other commission comment? Commissioner Lane.
Mr. Chairman, it looks to me like based on this discussion and Commissioner Drew's question about maybe tabling this particular report, it does show for information. And as a new commissioner and having read the report, I would like to at least hear some discussion since I do have some questions. I'm not at this point, I don't have a problem with just having it as informational. Clearly there is an issue that has to be explored further, I think, for this commission. But instead of, I don't know whether Commissioner Drew is proposing to table it till tomorrow or table it indefinitely, but I would like to, at least hear the report.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Rain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, back on this particular policy, it is my recollection that this policy was briefly reviewed. It was either in 09 or 10 by a committee. We had several different committee meetings. It was the Policy and Procedure and then also the Wildlife Damage Management Committee that reviewed a series of policies, and no suggestions on this policy were forthcoming to the commission. There were no suggestions for revision. I believe it was looked over, and nobody had anything to bring forward for changes for the commission at that time. And also there's an additional portion in it that perhaps we also need to look at, and that we might see another possible violation of, well, in my mind, a definite violation of our policy, which therefore would mean a violation of state law by the director, and that is that subsection 6, which is initiate wildlife damage management efforts upon using the best scientific and biological information available. Clearly, in my opinion, that has not been done due to the fact that the acknowledged experts, is my understanding, that are acknowledged in subsection 3 and 4 were not consulted, nor were they portion of the discussions to create this. So when our acknowledged experts were not consulted, and we are supposed to be using the best scientific and biological information, then that, in my mind, that is a violation of our policy, which in turn is a violation of state law. Thank you.
Any other commission comments? Seeing none.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Two quick things. One, if you allow it to go forward today as an informational item, that does not preclude you from requiring it to come back on another agenda should the commission decide that it wants to approve it rather than just have it as an informational item. And two, based off my review of 502-253 and the legislative history behind it, I don't believe there would be any violation of state law if you were to allow it to go forward only as an informational item and deem it approved as in that path, or if you bring it back to be approved.
I'll throw out a motion and we'll see where it goes.
All right. That's what I was waiting for.
At this point, I think I would be most comfortable making a motion to approve the agenda and tabling item 6B, fiscal year 2012 Predator Management Report to the Predator Committee we have for review and recommendation back to the Commission.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed?
Commissioner Lane opposed.
What was the vote, sir?
I'm sorry?
The vote was how many to how many?
I didn't vote, so 7-1.
Thanks, sir.
Okay. That took care of that agenda item.